Well, welcome to all who are listening and watching. My name is Everett Vander Horst. I'm a co-pastor at Meadowlands Fellowship Christian Reformed Church in Ancaster, Ontario, which is part of Classes Hamilton. And I also serve as chair of Towards CRC Canada, which is the organization that is bringing you this discussion today. Our group is made up of Canadian CRC members who believe it is time for a distinct Christian Reformed Church on our side of the border with a synod that is able to focus on ministry and collaboration in Canada. It's not a new idea. It goes back to at least 1957, and it's been a part of the landscape of the CRC here, waning and waxing ever since. Today, we'll be having a conversation about the agenda for Synod 2025, which will be happening actually right across the lawn from me outside my office window here at Redeemer University. In particular, we want to discuss what's at stake for Canada. What are the potential decisions that will have an impact on churches and ministries and ministers and office bearers and members as we seek to work faithfully following the Holy Spirit's guidance together? But first, let's begin with a word of introduction from the others who are here with me on the screen. Friends, if you can share your name and your church and your classes and a bit of your experience in and with the Christian Reformed Church. Bev, why don't you go first?
Hey, hi, I'm Bev Bandstra. I live in Ladner, BC. I'm a member of Ladner Christian Reformed Church for about 42 years now. As background, I am an American. I have now renounced my citizenship. Come from a Lutheran background, Scandinavian heritage. Met my husband at Dordt College. He's a Canadian CRC, son of Dutch immigrants. After college, we went to Nigeria and taught as associate missionaries for World Missions. And we were there for 2 years. I have, in my work experience, I worked for the Society of Christian Schools in BC with Lee Holler. And I was on the board of Christian Schools International for 6 years. I worked for many years at Regent College in Vancouver. And I've been on many school boards around the province as well. I guess my most significant connection is, as a member of Ladner CRC, I did serve as an elder and clerk for 3 years, but because I disagree with the decisions of Synod 2022, I can no longer serve as an elder in our church. I did serve on the Council of Delegates for 5.5 years. I was on the executive of the Canadian Ministry Board for all of that time, and on the executive of the Council of Delegates for about 6 months. I resigned 6 months before my term was over. My 6 years were over because I disagreed. I couldn't sign the statement of beliefs that the COD was required everyone to sign. And just as a note, it was my husband and myself that sent that letter out and got 761 signatures and sent that on to Zachary King and Dan DeCam and Al Postma. And you might have seen the Banner article about that. And that's me.
Thank you, Bev. Gord.
Yes, my name is Gordon Vlieg. I'm a member of the Christian Reformed Church of St. Albert here in Alberta. And I've served many, many years on church councils. Most recently, last year, I finished a 4-year term as chair. Interestingly, while I don't have the CV that Bev does, I was actually baptized in the Canadian Reformed Church. There's a little news flash. And my younger sister, who was a year younger than me, she was baptized in the Christian Reformed Church. And the issue was over Christian schools. And I have older sisters, siblings, who were just going to the fledgling Christian school in Edmonton. And the Canadian Reformed Church looked very dimly on members sending their kids to the Christian Reformed Church, where the devil was cloaked in sheep's clothing. Better to send your kids to the public school where you know where the devil resides. So anyways, I just thought I'd throw that in there because I think it's relevant in this conversation that we're having, that there have been issues back in the 1950s, back in the 1940s, which spawned the creation of the Vrijgemaakt Church in Holland. There's always been some issues, and here we are again looking at issues that are causing us to have this very serious conversation. I'll leave it at that.
Peter.
Thank you. Peter Bulthuis here. Speaking of Christian schools, I was a teacher and principal and so on in Christian schools in Ontario for 40 years, subsequent to which I joined World Renew for 10 years. The World Renew time in the CRC was a formative time for me, even though I was already somewhat more mature, well, never mind, old by that point. It was lovely to go across Canada to visit Christians, to visit CRCs from Halifax to Victoria, and see the passion and the excitement that folks in the pews and the councils have for God, for His kingdom, and so on. Had also been involved with classes and councils and so on for much of my adult life. I was a delegate to Synod twice, once in 1985 and once in 2023. I was in 85, and because of I taught music and choir in my schools for a bunch of years, they put me on the Psalter Hymnal Committee.
Oh.
Well, for 2 weeks straight, we sang. There was SATB people there, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and we sight read all the songs of the proposed Grey hymnal. And I thought, this is like heaven. This is like heaven. I want to go back sometime to Synod. Well, I did in 2023. It wasn't quite the same, shall we say. Things had changed from 1985 to 23. To my mind, not for the good. There has been an overwhelming heaviness that has descended on the CRC, in my view. And that's one of the reasons, because that heaviness has settled in, we need to have a brighter future. And I think that brighter future lies with a separate Canadian CRC. Thanks.
Okay. Well, let's take a look then at that agenda for Synod. One of the biggest changes, I think, from last year, that came about last year, was the decision to define gravamina. A gravamina, for those who are wondering, is it's basically a statement, a weighty statement that has some gravitas, that says, I have this or that concern or a question or objection even to the creeds and confessions. And as an office bearer, you can submit that to your council, and then the council has a decision to make whether to say, that office bearer can continue in service, with the understanding that they're not going to be sort of pushing their agenda or bringing up their objections either in meetings or in the congregation, so if they can serve with that understanding or not. And gravamina have been used somewhat sparingly, to be fair, for decades in the Christian Reformed Church. But then with the changes around connected to the human sexuality report and the confessional status that was attached to the understanding of chastity, a greater number of people have said, well, I'm certainly willing to serve, but I cannot serve. I cannot. You have to know that I'm not in agreement with this confessional status declaration of Synod 2022. So it was last year in 2024 that Synod said, if someone has an objection to creeds and confessions or the confessional interpretation thereof, they cannot be nominated to serve anymore as an office bearer in the CRC. And many people found that to be an overreach, Synod overreaching into the council rooms of churches all across North America, and in a sense telling councils that here are the rules for who we think you ought to be receiving as office bearers. There's quite a bit of objection to that. It's been a big part of the conversations that we've had with churches and ministry leaders here with towards CRC Canada. And overtures 14 and then 16 through 20 are asking for changes to that decision from last year. The article in the church order supplement that governs gravamina, either seeking to repeal that decision or to loosen the timelines that are connected to it, or to create a new category sort of for conscientious objectors. What sort of impacts have we seen when it comes to that particular change from Synod last year, the redefining of what a gravamen is or how it functions?
We've had a bit more difficulty finding council members because people have to go through mental gymnastics. How am I going to do this? What I want to serve God. I want to serve God through His church, but I'm not sure I can do this. So our council had to reconsider how to make sure that the right, good, solid people could be in place to serve God through His church. And it created quite a bit of concern in our council, and it has created quite a bit of difficulty in councils that I know around me as well in Hamilton.
In St. Albert CRC, I don't want to point fingers at other churches, but I do know of a number of churches in the Edmonton area that have basically turned a blind eye to all of the dictates from Synod in the past 2 or 3 years. Office bearers who are openly against Synod's characterization through the human sexuality report. People who are office bearers who are openly against that still serve on those church councils, because to deal with it as St. Albert CRC has done basically means that you're going to end up gutting the church councils, that you have a sizable number of people who are not really convicted that this is the proper way to go. And so then what? And so you either, as our church did, we dealt with it and have started the process to disaffiliate, or you can say, no, you know what? We're just going to keep our head down because our local ministry is so important. We don't want to jeopardize that. So they basically become, dishonest in how they're carrying on as a Christian Reformed church in North America. And I think that's something that needs to change.
I think last year, Everett, Rita, I watched last year's video, and Rita Klein-Gelting said that, people are just holding their noses and signing. And I think that's happening a lot. I know in our own church, Ladner CRC, we're part of Classes BC Southeast. It's an issue to get candidates, I would say, because people say I can't sign, but a lot of people just are not clued in to what they're signing. We're way out here in the West. You could walk to the ocean from our house, and we're just kind of untouched by, in a way, untouched by these. Now, I know there are churches in our classes and in Classes BC Northwest that are really struggling with this and not knowing what to do. But there's no movement in BC, as far as I'm aware, of, let's say, combining, disaffiliating churches like they are doing in Alberta and Ontario. That there's no movement like that. But I think people are either don't care, they'll just sign it. They're not really sure what this is about, and it was Synod, so that sounds pretty good.
Right. Well, I think it was Paul Vanderklay in a video who talked about that he predicted that what's going to happen in churches across the denomination is that people will have what he called a silent gravamen, which is I'm going to hold my nose and sign that anyway. In particular, I think that's happening for ministers of the word, for whom This isn't a volunteer position for the next 3 years. This is my livelihood. This is my calling. And how do I navigate this, the kind of disagreement that I feel in my own heart, and balancing that with the needs of my family. And I think part of the challenge too has been defining full agreement. Like the covenant for officers can be signed if you fully agree with the creeds and confessions and confessional interpretations thereof. And the denominational office, Zach King's office, has issued a statement that was to clarify, well, what does it mean to sign, and how fully does fully agree mean? And because everyone, of course, has doubts at different seasons of life, or doctrines that they struggle with, and I'm not sure that was helpful. I think to make the kinds of fully agree statements kind of across the board, right, across an entire denomination of approximately 1,000 churches, takes away from the pastoral ministry that happens in that conversation with someone who's been nominated to serve, right? It's a very, very difficult project to bring about that sort of mental uniformity in such a large organization. And I think that's what the overtures 14, 16 through 20 are all getting at in various different ways, is that this is untenable. I don't know about the rest of you, but even without those sort of changes, it's difficult to get a full slate of nominees to serve on a council, right?
For sure.
Yeah. So it'll be very interesting to see. I think that will probably be one of the bigger issues that gets discussed at Synod this year. What are we going to do with the decision we made last year? Are we going to double down? Are we going to status quo, or are we going to make some changes that will better facilitate ministry on the local level? And again, it's a deliberative body, so it's always very difficult to predict what a synod is going to decide and do. Anybody else on Gravamina? What that's going to look like? Oh yeah, go ahead, Beth.
I would just say that the whole premise of a Gravamina, the whole setup, creates its own problems, because if you sign a Gravamina, then you have to go through this counseling or this education to write your wrong opinion. And I don't think anyone who says I can't sign this Gravamina is going to change their mind. I think it's just they're I don't know the phrase I'm trying to find, but yeah, it's kind of self-defeating in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, another major change then from last year was that Synod decided that every classis needs to have at least one time over the course of the year. So for some classes, that's 2 meetings. For other classes, it's 3 meetings. They need to require every delegate to physically sign again the covenant for office bearers, and that needs to happen on an annual basis at least one of the classis meetings. I haven't heard a lot from the U.S. about how that has played out. I've heard some rumblings, but I know in Canada at I think all of the classis meetings, that has gotten significant attention. Mm-hmm. And what we see in overtures 11, which is an overture from Ontario Southwest, and overture 13, which comes from a church covenant CRC in Winnipeg, which is part of the one and only by-country classis Lake Superior. It comes to us from that congregation because that classis did not adopt it. But both those overtures 11 and 13 are asking Synod to repeal the requirement that classes have delegates sign that covenant for office bearers annually. Again, reflections on what that requirement does at a classis level, or sort of what you've experienced or heard in terms of ministry in your context.
Again, if I could, I was looking at these overtures, and when all the Canadian overtures ask Synod to, let's reconsider this, and let's back off from being so strident and so dark. Let's be a little bit more wide open. Whereas the American overtures are the opposite of that. I'm not even speaking generally. That's how it looks. And I think that classes have tied themselves into knots trying to figure out how to do this, because the Canadian classes with which I'm familiar have not necessarily, as Everett said, let's go by this and go by the book, and let's march ahead as per instructions. They're saying not so fast. There's some other ways that we need to consider to do it, because the work of the Lord is necessary here, and we don't see that the work of the Lord is being moved forward by having to sign every time you're here. In fact, possibly just the opposite. And I think that's one of the reasons why a number of the Canadian overtures are saying, let's broaden this landscape a little bit, again, like it was in years gone by, because we're now standing in face of what has to be done, and we're blocking that.
Others on that. I'm reflecting that one of the complications that classes have run into. I think of my own classes Hamilton, and I know classes Quinte more recently. Part of the challenge is that if signing the covenant for office bearers is one of the mechanisms by which the classis is constituted, right? If there are objections or overtures to discuss about whether or not we want to or are willing to go along with this new synodical requirement, well, you can't talk about the overtures about signing until you've constituted the meeting. And if constituted the meeting requires signing, you're sort of in a very, very difficult loop, right? And so in a number of places, there's been even long discussions about, well, how do we actually navigate the conversation around how to convene a meeting, because you can't do that until you convene the meeting, right?
Yeah.
Related to that is overture 21. Overture 21, and I think is from classes Iacota. Is that Peter? You and I were just talking. We were just talking about that. Class Iacota.
Okay.
Overture 21 would put classes and churches under limited suspension that have not taken that step to require signatures on the covenant for office bearers as Synod has prescribed. Classes Toronto and classes Alberta are named. I know there are others that perhaps Iacota hasn't caught on to. And I'm not going to name them here, but that's again part of that, that sort of general thrust that we're seeing. Some Canadian overtures that are calling for sort of a widening of grace again, returning to a more open approach that says everyone here is welcome as a delegate. You've been delegated by your church. And this is a delegated body, versus these are the decisions that Synod has made, and how do we go about ensuring that that everyone, every classis, every council, every office bearer is in 100% compliance with those decisions. That's a pretty far-reaching overture. Should that be adopted? How would that affect ministry in your area in Canada? if that were to be, if that overture were to be adopted.
I'm sorry, I'm not, in tune with our council so much because neither my husband nor I are on it right now. And I haven't been to the last two classes, well, the whole classes. I've been part of those. Anyway, but I just see this as just an increase in authoritarianism and pretty much reflects what's happening south of the border politically. And Peter Sherman said it really well in Blessed Are the Undone. He said, when denominations get very narrow like this, the walls get higher and the door gets smaller. And they're making this door very, very small. When I was on the Council of Delegates, these sorts of things came up quite a lot. Making new rules and so on. Not synod rules, but just generally. And I remember one member speaking out saying, it's not about love, it's about orthodoxy. So what do you do with that? Where do you start? If orthodoxy is the main point of these synodical decisions and these overtures, such as 21, we've lost. And I don't mean just the Canadian CRCs. I mean the Christian Reformed Church in North America has lost. And these others, Overture 7, I want to talk about that a little bit, and 75, it's a death knell.
Why don't you give an explanation of Overture 7?
Okay,
and what you see, and I'm particularly interested because of where it goes, and also your experience on the Council of Delegates.
Okay, so I have very close experience with the person who wrote this one. So I just want to read this one paragraph that was on the Abide website that was sent around to TCRCC. So they're talking about having to interview everyone nominated for board positions, let's say the Board of Trustees for Calvin University and so on. Now, it is true that it's a bit of a rubber stamping, but I think there's other ways to approach this. But to have to go through their method of answering these questions, the way that the committee would be directed to have them answered, makes it very, very, very narrow. And I think this is a really dumb statement here. This is written by, it was from the Abide website on Overture 7. So we talked about they talk about just having to trust that the nominees have been vetted somewhat, recommended, whatever. This trust perhaps worked better when the CRC was a more culturally monolithic church body, where most people knew everyone else, either directly or indirectly through family ties, friendships, or having gone to seminary or college together. However, those earlier days have changed. Make America great again, as our denomination has now become more wonderfully diverse. That diversity brings new blessings, but it also brings new challenges, the challenges of not knowing each other very well. That is club church, that you know everybody. That is the old boys club. And that really bothers me. I heard so much on the Council of Delegates, well, I'm CRC born and raised. And I'm thinking, you know what? That just makes often your perspective quite narrow. And, if you have to be a Calvin University grad and a Calvin Seminary grad, and that's your little pool, and that's who's going to get on committees, again, where's the grace? Where's the diversity? Where's the gracious space here to have other opinions? And there were lots of people on the COD who were, Hispanic, Black, disabled. It was, there was a decent mix there of the diversity. And all we heard on the COD was diversity, diversity, diversity. Well, this is totally against diversity. And it's just way too authoritarian. And it's going, those questions that are in the overture are so narrow. It assumes there's one interpretation, one reformed interpretation of scripture. And I can't agree with that.
Well, and I'm guessing that for someone who was who came into the CRC as an adult, to hear people around that governance table, that leadership table saying, well, I was born and bred CRC, that's not a very welcoming posture
No.
for someone. And you know, for the others around the table who may have come from a different background, especially where we're making a wonderful priority of greater diversity.
Yes, exactly.
In church leadership.
If I hear, if you're not Dutch, you're not much, one more time, my brain is going to explode. And I just wanted to say, yeah, that's what I wanted to say about Overture 7. I was just appalled by that. And then Overture 21, again, this top-down authoritarianism. So.
Yeah.
Wow. Well said. But it seems to me, you know, diversity, which may be a dirty word, but I don't think it is. It's a lovely word. Will sharpen everybody. When there's differences of opinion around the table, you need to think carefully and articulate thoughtfully so that we can have a conversation about ideas as opposed to have diatribes against individuals. And that's what diversity is all about. And then to enable to allow folks with holding different opinions to sit around the whole table, everybody's going to gain. No one's going to lose in that situation. Everybody's going to gain if we have diversity. But if we stifle diversity, it's a lose-lose situation, it seems to me. And I think, yeah, that's what Bev said too. And she probably said it better. She said it better than me. I don't know why I had to mansplain that.
Well, if I can just echo that, you know, I understand that Abide has actually come out of the closet now. They used to do things by stealth, you know, that, hey, have you heard about Abide? And, you know, a few people had, and I mean, we're talking, you know, 3 years ago, a lot of people hadn't heard about it. But now, in fact, the executive, you know, it had been rumored, and now they're, you know, out and basically saying, hey, if you want to be on the executive of Synod, you need to subscribe to, you know, the values as laid out by Abide. And you must, you know, you got to sign to that to be on the executive. So that goes to, you know, your point about diversity. No, we don't want diversity. We want uniformity. We want everybody to, you know, speak the same voice, because that's our strength. If we all speak with one voice, then, you know, then it ends up much like, you know, the executive orders you see on a daily basis from the president in the United States. It's like we're just going to rule by decree.
Yeah.
You know, the other question that it begs is, who's going to vet the people who are on the vetting committee? Right. I mean, yeah. Well,
yeah, exactly.
You know, what's the mechanism by which, you know, the this you know, purity committee or whatever you want to call it is going to operate? It becomes a very, you know, you're creating a very, very narrow bottleneck at a time when yeah, we've stated that some of our goals is to broaden the spectrum of the Christian Reformed Church. At the same time, we're narrowing it terribly. Yeah, I'd be curious to see if that how that overture is received. Peter,
if you have a chance, go see a Star Trek movie, a Star Trek show. Who Will Watch the Watchers? It's a good one. Back in the day, in the 60s, I was already old then, but that's one to watch. Who Will Watch the Watchers? Sorry, carry on.
I'm sorry, I'm taking up too much time. May I say one more thing? We didn't talk about the two overtures about the banner.
Mm.
I served on the Banner Advisory Committee for 3 years, and I think the world of Xiao Chong, and his integrity and heart. And if those two overtures pass, they're numbers 5 and 6. We're done. Then the banner just becomes a voice of abide, and there's no journalism there. There's no freedom of speech in the banner, and I just think that is appalling.
Yeah, I know that has been a debate in the past. Is the banner as the denominational magazine, is its purpose to sort of trumpet the good things that the Christian Reformed Church has been doing, or has it been to do journalism, right?
Yeah.
To challenge, to question, to stimulate new ways of thinking, even at the risk of giving offense at times, right? When you've got you've got a denomination of 1,000 churches, it'll be a pretty poor magazine, I would think, that doesn't offend somebody. I remember that that's a quote from an older preacher that I think spoke in one of our seminary classes. He says it's a pretty poor sermon that doesn't offend somebody. And I think you're right. If the changes that are being proposed to the banner's mandate get passed, it's just going to become sort of a fairly boring echo chamber.
Yeah.
You had also mentioned, Bev, Overture 75, which was deferred from Synod 2024. It's an overture that calls for the clarification of the relationship, that is the lines of authority between synods, classes, and councils. What was it that you were hoping to point out about that?
Well, again, reading it, I just found that there's an assumption there that there's one method of biblical interpretation that is acceptable. And it just assumes that there's just one method. And I think that what drew me to the Christian Reformed Church was the love of reading and learning and developing different points of view and accepting different definitions of what a Reformed interpretation of Scripture could be. All the excitement of ICS and all kinds of things that we were very engaged in at Dort and continued to be engaged in, and then just allowing for different points of view within biblical interpretation. And this is gone. This is trying to go. There's movement here to there's only one way. And it becomes quite a literal interpretation of Scripture, which I think is quite wrong. Whatever. But that's what I got from Overture 75.
I do think that what the overture calls for, clarifying the lines of authority, there's a sense in which they're identifying that there's been a lot of confusion around how far can a synod go in terms of disciplining a classis or a classis, a council, etc. And there is also a task force report about what's the difference between a synod giving pastoral advice versus other categories of decisions that are made. But I think there's a sense in which clarity is not helpful when the church is called to do ministry, because ministry itself is messy and lines are fuzzy, and as we said earlier on, it's, for synod to make declarations around, well, this is exactly the way things need to be at the ground level. It takes away the freedom. It takes away the authority of the local council in their own wisdom to make decisions around, what is best for this congregation, what is best for our outreach, where's the Spirit leading us, and I think accountability around, the work of church visitors, for instance, or accountability at a classis level, where there's a conversation around ministry challenges and opportunities and how we respond together to those. That's the kind of healthy messiness that in which ministry flourishes. If you look in the book of Acts, you don't see okay, first of all, before everybody heads out, let's make sure we're all on the same page and get all the rules right for how we're going to do whatever it is we're going to do. It was kind of messy, and apostles made different decisions and headed off in different directions. I think in the I can't remember who wrote it. It was maybe Neil DeRue who wrote the introduction to Blessed Are the Undone, in which he points out, there are 7 different letters that are sent to the 7 different churches in Revelation 2 and 3, right? Each of them is dealing with their own things and need sort of different words of guidance. And the same, of course, goes for Paul's letters to his different churches. And so this hope for clarity of uniformity and authority doesn't really work. It's sort of like, a vegetable garden. A lot of vegetable gardens they're messy looking things. I remember when I was at my previous church, which was in Michigan, we talked about having a community garden, raised beds. It was a fairly large property. We'd have raised beds, and we'd welcome the neighborhood in to grow little gardens and build community together and encourage one another. And one of the objections that we got was vegetable gardens are ugly. They grow over the boundaries, and it'll be an eyesore in our property, and we don't want that. Anyway, we did go ahead with the community garden, and yeah, they were messy, I admit it. Yeah. How does that work in terms of what you've seen in terms of perhaps your own churches and maybe churches you've been a part of in the past? How the relationship between your church, your local council, and your classis, how that has changed in recent years because of some of these sort of authoritarian decisions or attempts at clarifying lines. I mean, maybe it's if I was the question, I should go first. I would say that in my own classes, in Class of Hamilton, I think there was a collegiality among pastors that we used to have that has disappeared. It hasn't completely disappeared, but I think there's always a little bit of holding your cards close to your chest. You're not quite sure if you say something in a casual setting that might not come back to you later. Ministers who are no longer welcome in different ministry settings or for pulpit supply because of how you've been responding to things that are going on at a denominational level. And these things are not it's breaking down the kind of community that has blessed us for so long, and it has a certain feeling that these pressures and divisive impulses are being delivered to us from outside, right? This synodical decisions that force a congregation or force a classis to sort of decide, which side of this line now are you on, because this line has been drawn. It's it is deeply troubling.
Yeah,
And I know that's happening in regions all over. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I was a church visitor for 6 years. This is my last year currently. For most of those years, I and the people with whom I worked as church visitors had an incredibly good time. And we had a sense that we were doing something very valuable, bringing the wishes and desires of the churches to classes and vice versa. And there was really no division in classes. I'm in classes Hamilton as well. The last couple of years, it's been quite different. I've been excused from a couple of churches. You'd rather not see me as a church visitor there. It's been painful because I was robbed from, and they were robbed as well from having a difference of opinion, not schismatic, not heretical, but a difference of opinion in looking at some of the things that we used to talk about. But that's over, and the hard lines that are being drawn also sort of remove ministers from the positions. If you don't know exactly where you stand on a certain spot, if you're in the messy middle, like many of us are, then you're excused from your pulpit. And those are the kind of painful things that I've seen too in classes Hamilton and beyond. And it's not healthy, because non-diversity is not unity, but it's nor is it community. It's just a death knell. Again, I mansplained Bev's words. Thanks for the death knell. Did it again.
Others around that changes that you've seen in your own classes over the past, say, decade or more.
Experience having been a delegate over the past 4 years, that it's very much the majority is say, starting with the HSR against or is in alignment with the HSR. But there's a significant portion, usually about a third of the delegates, who voted affirmingly, so to speak. And what's happened, I think, is that classis has basically gone with the majority. And you could say, well, okay, that's the democratic process. But there's a significant voice that says, wait a minute, that this isn't right. And I, it's my observation that the classis is basically then, looking to the east and saying, well, what does Synod say? Well, Synod is telling us to do this. So, we've got the majority. So let's just, we'll kick out all of the malcontents, the people who don't want to sign the CFO, and we'll just get on. And let's just, we'll be silent, we'll be quiet, and eventually those people will just leave. I find that kind of, you can call it passive aggressive. That kind of thing is happening as well. That it's just like we nod, and then we carry on, we move forward because, we have a majority. And, as opposed to saying, how do we keep the unity that we seek in spite of non-uniformity? And I think they're choosing, well, let's just, if we have to choose, we'll choose uniformity, which I think is a huge risk to the CRC.
Great.
I would, that I think brings us to Overture 28. Overture 28 comes from my church, from Meadowlands Fellowship, and that is the overture that really brings forward and brings to Synod the goal that Court CRC Canada launched with 2 summers ago, and that is let's restructure the CRCNA and create a CRC Canada and a CRC US, 2 denominations that are in close fellowship with one another, each with their own synod, each able to take the time and give the attention to dreaming and managing and working toward ministry together in their own country's context. For for our own purposes, in terms of all of the struggles that we've talked about over the past little while together, Overture 28 is really built on the premise that a Canadian synod would handle these sorts of struggles much differently, right? That Canadian mission requires a different approach than what we've seen from a US-dominated synod, and that Canadian churches and Canadian members are able to minister and work together across differences. The Canadians together are able to say, hey, let's get on with ministry together. You doing as God calls you to do, we doing as God calls us to do. Let's get on with it and just let gifted people serve. Does that resonate? Does that sort of picture of a Canadian Christian Reformed church, does that resonate with your own experience of churches and congregations in your own areas, in here in Ontario and in the West? Does that picture make sense?
Well, I'll throw that out there. Sure, it sure does. My involvement towards CRC Canada is an example of that. I want to see, Canadians make decisions about Canadian ministry by and for Canadians. Us being forced out of the CRCNA, in essence, because of all of the overtures that have been acceded to over the past couple of years concerning office bearers, means that our church can't function anymore. So what have we done? Well, we're now, in consultation and conversations with the Alberta Reform Network. It's a group of churches that, okay, if you don't want us, you're kicking us out. We're not leaving because we want to leave. We're leaving because you're kicking us out. And so, but we want to remain in community with other churches that, and it's not just about disaffiliation. It's about shared vision for ministry. And, whether we remain in the Christian Reformed Church or we leave the Christian Reformed Church, NA, I think, in large part to what happens towards CRC Canada. If we can cobble together, if we can become the Christian Reformed Church in Canada, conservative, less conservative, affirming, non-affirming, like those are, that's the kind of CRC that I think that we can belong to.
I think Canadians have long had a sense of trying to work out diversity and create unity that way. I mean, we have binational country here. We have First Nations, we have Anglos, we have English-speaking folks, we have French-speaking folks. And over the years, from 1867 on, we've tried to, and it's been messy, it's been horrible sometimes, but been ridiculous. But we continue to work at it. It's never done. It's always in the process of. And that's our zeitgeist. It's our history. It's who we are and what we are. This is what we do, and we'll continue on. We'll continue to struggle, but we have a sense that it's okay to have a diversity and call that unity. That's our definition of unity: being together and continuing the dialogue. Maybe it's ideal, but it's who and what we are.
Everett, I thought this was an excellent overture. But what I encountered on the Council of Delegates is that two things. Canada is still considered the irritating little brother to the head church. And Americans just don't get, well, I shouldn't say all, but many Americans that I have encountered within the Christian Reformed Church just don't get it. They just don't get that we're different. And I I don't want to use that phrase, but yeah, they kind of think we're another, that we operate exactly like the United States does. When I brought up things, you know, I was very involved in the SALT report and trying to give the Canadian side more time with it. When we brought that up and said we have to be more CRA compliant than this report is, people didn't know what that meant. Well, I explained it and they said, well, that's government overreach. And I said, it's not government overreach in Canada to comply with CRA regulations. They just don't get it. And I really think that they're going to read this and go, well, what's the problem? And I think that a lot of people in the pew in my classes, BC Southeast, have no idea that it's problematic to continue to be 25% of a denomination. They just don't get it. The Americans don't get it, and a lot of Canadians in the CRC just don't get it. And when I talk about towards CRC Canada and having our own denomination, they'll say, well, yeah, but I'm not inclusive, so I can't be part of that. They associate it with being against the HSR. That is very, very unfortunate. And they see towards CRC Canada as being inclusive and just wanting to exist for gay rights, gay marriage, and not all of this stuff about gravamen and signing and messiness and narrowing the door, shortening the door and narrowing the walls, which I see quite clearly. But then I've had experience on the CSI board for 6 years, which was interesting, and on the COD, and I saw this clearly. And I just wish everyone would see what a problem it is to stay with the American side. I just think this is an excellent overture. I would just love for this to pass. I really, really, really would. And also the communication from Classis BC Northwest was also very, very good. Yeah, that's too bad that didn't, that was maybe too late or didn't get, well, it was from the classes, wasn't it? But it's just a communication. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree, especially on the matter of the communication from BC Northwest. I thought it was a sort of a heartfelt cry that got at the relationships within the classes, how trust has been lost, and really the devastating effects of these sort of heavy-handed, hard line drawing decisions that classes has made, or that Synod has made. And I think what it does is it underscores the idea that when Synod is making these decisions around overtures and reports, et cetera, it all sounds very sort of, pie in the sky, the muckety mucks are doing what they want to do. And that doesn't really affect us here on the ground. Like, we're just going to keep our heads down and keep doing ministry. But the fact is, it does have an effect. It has an effect on relationships. And relationships are really the core of how the church comes to expression, right? We are in relationship with one another as we are in the relationship that we have with Christ and through Christ. And so when we monkey with that in destructive ways, people get hurt and ministry gets hobbled. So yeah, we're hopeful too that people will come to understand that a Canadian Christian Reformed Church, really in partnership, with our American siblings, an equal partnership where it's denomination to denomination, not sort of minority irritant and majority that sort of knows the best way forward, is a hopeful path. And I think, to be fair to our American siblings, I don't necessarily fault them for not understanding ministry in Canada and what that requires, right? I don't have a good grasp of ministry needs in Portugal, and it's not on my radar. It doesn't come into my day to day. But at the same time, I don't want to dictate ministry in Portugal either, because I know I don't know. I don't assume that the dynamics around culture and ministry, that the necessary interpretations of Scripture, that has has missional consequence that you have to take into mind if you're trying to reach your wider community. And so in a sense, it's a call to Canadians to say, hey, let's do this together. And to American delegates to say, free us up so that we can be partners together in new ways. We're not looking to slam the door. I ministered for 11 years at a church in Michigan. I have wonderful friends there. We have family there. My wife is American. So this is not an anti-American thing. This is a ministry thing. This is a ministry in Canada initiative that's not only is it time, but we're well into overtime, I would say.
I agree.
I think that's speaking of time, we've probably reached the end of our time together. I want to thank each of you for your contributions, not only in this short discussion, but also your contributions to the Church of Jesus Christ and the coming of God's kingdom in Canada and across the world. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your attention and your words. And blessings to you. And we will, I'm sure, all keep a close eye on what happens at Synod starting just a few days from now.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you very much.